All right, welcome. Thank you for coming and watching is this our fifth workshop over the last 3 weeks for the Gift of Open Source 2020. This is reviewing an issue and applying a patch with Amy June Heinlein. Thanks, Amy June.
Thanks. So I'll just get started. Like Katie said, we're going to be reviewing an issue and applying a patch, and we're going to do it a couple of different ways. So I'll go through the slide deck and then do a demo. And I do have some caveats in here and some tools, but not all of them are working right now, but usually they do. So it's sort of a weird troubleshooting episode. But that's good because this is what happens in real life. So I just want to say that ahead of time. It may be a little different than the normal workflow because some of the tools are being worked on right now. Like Katie said, I'm Amy June Heinlein. I work with Canopy Studios. I am their QA engineer and community ambassador. I do all kinds of things in the community. My favorite being mentoring, and so this series of workshops is near and dear to my heart because my favorite part of giving back to Drupal is showing other people how to give back to Drupal. And I'm a Pantheon hero. I like to say this everywhere I go because it's such a great program, and you get to partner with really lovely people, and they give you missions. So if you don't know what to work on for a day and you want to contribute back to open source, they have roadmaps and game plans for people. So it's a really low barrier to entry for Drupal contributions being a Pantheon hero. So why give back to open source? Any number of ways. There's the guilt way where I could say if you depend on open source depends on you, but really contributing makes you feel good. Working on open source, you move your projects closer to perfection, no matter what project you're working on, say it's Drupal or WordPress. And as you work on open source, you build that street cred that comes along with it, because most open source communities have profile pages and organization pages that reflect your contributions. So the more we give back to Drupal or WordPress, the more we build our resume, and the more you contribute, the more you learn. And I know this firsthand because I call myself a self-described non-coder, but I do workshops like this and I open issues and I look at code. And so the more issues I get involved with and the more code I look at, the more I understand all those basic concepts. So just a quick agenda. We're going to look at the issue queue and find out how to find an issue. We're going to talk about 2 different workspaces because Drupal has a core workspace and a contributed workspace, and they're a little bit different. I'm going to go over some search techniques and go over advanced search. I'm also going to give a quick run through of some useful tools. I'm not going to utilize all of those tools because some of the tools are for more advanced users. And I like to tell people you don't need to have, these things installed on your machine to give back to Drupal. So we'll just kind of glance on those. And then we'll talk about reviewing a patch locally versus doing it browser-based, because there are ways to review issues without ever having Drupal downloaded on your machine. And then we're gonna, I forgot to say I forgot to list the future workshops, but then we're gonna do a demo of applying a patch and how to review code. And then later this afternoon, we're going to look at giving back to Drupal in the form of documentation, which is totally non-code. And then tomorrow, we're going to go over how to actually write the patch and upload the patch to Drupal.org issues. So how do you find an issue? Because sometimes that's the most difficult part is finding what you want to work on. I use my Drupal.org profile as a landing page. You can see that there's some buttons across the top, and depending on your privileges in Drupal, you might not see all of these buttons, but the most important button there is that dashboard button. And we'll look at this when we do the demo, and we'll kind of talk about the blocks and stuff. But the dashboard is really a good place because you can customize what blocks you see on those dashboards. And you can also see what posts, if we go across the row of links here across the top, there's a direct link to all of your posts, all the things that you've been committed, all of the issues you've worked on, say you're a maintainer of a project, so this is a good landing page just for some quick links because they're already bookmarked for you. So we always say core versus contrib. And if you're more familiar with WordPress, it's core versus plugins. Our equivalent in Drupal to plugins are contributed modules, themes, and distributions. And the difference is in Drupal, they're all open source and free, whereas WordPress has a little bit unique environment of a different like pay model for the plugins. But in Drupal, we separate the two into core and contributed. So Drupal.org is where most of the code that makes Drupal sites, including the Drupal project, it's called core. All Drupal websites run a version of core. It can be Drupal 7, Drupal 8, Drupal 9, that's your version of core. But what makes each website different is the contributed modules we put on those. And that's often referred to as contrib. And you can pick and choose from a wide array and range of contributed modules that add functionality to the site. So there's 3 different types of contrib spaces. There's distributions, and those provide site features and functions for a specific type of site. And it comes in a single download, and it contains core software and plus some already moderated and picked out contributed modules and themes, and perhaps some of the configuration is predefined. A theme is a set of files that define the look and the feel of your website. So if you just download Drupal core, you don't get much of a choice. So you would extend your theme with a contributed theme. And a module is basically a set of PHP or CSS files, JavaScript that extends that site functionality a little bit more. So today when I'm doing a review, we're going to be reviewing in the contrib space because it's a little bit less of a barrier for novices. It's not as rigid. Things move along a little bit faster. And I really like to empower folks. So I recommend starting in the contrib space a little bit more. So you can see the issue queue, this is the 1,000-foot view. And the reason I want to show this image is because, we're going to review an issue today. And you can visualize in the issue queue, you can see the project name, you can see the title, you can see the status. And in that status column, there's written copy that says what the status of the module is. And that second project, compose or deploy, we can see is in that needs review phase. And also along with like having that text copy, the issue queue is color coded depending on the status too. So you can quickly look at the issue queue and see the color coding and see that status column as to what you're going to work on. As a beginner, I like to recommend projects or issues to steer clear of. As a novice, I like to tell folks to stay away from projects that are not actively maintained. Perhaps the module hasn't been updated in 2 years, that kind of thing. Stay away from projects that have tons and tons and tons of open issues. Maybe the maintainers aren't quick to review the code and that sort of thing. And that's okay. But as a beginner and a novice, it's easier to work on projects where you get feedback soon, because the more feedback you get, the more empowered you get and the more issues you work on. I do recommend staying away from issues that have changed status many times. Perhaps there's some conflict with the roadmap of what to do. It could have been a patch put up, but then it needs review, and then the scope of the ticket has changed. And those can be a little bit complicated to glean through the comments and know the right path to go through. And then, of course, stay away from issues where the processes or fixes are discussed back and forth. And this can happen a lot in core, where it starts out as a bug and there's a tangible task, but then more, kind of that proverbial can of worms gets opened. So as a beginner, it's easier to work on issues that have more straightforward comments and roadmaps. So looking at the queue, like I said, sometimes the most difficult thing to do when deciding to work on Drupal is, finding an issue. So we'll look at this more in the demo, but there's a few ways to look at to find what you're looking for. You can search for keywords. This might help you find a title that you're looking for. The keywords, you might use something like, documentation or README. The status, and the next slide is all about all the different life cycles of an issue and the status. But the status goes back to that, needs work, needs review, active, needs to be ported. Priority, you might have a little bit longer to work on a project, or you don't have, say, the immediate, you don't have the immediacy. You need to work on a critical issue, so you can narrow it down by priority and pick an issue that's that's less severe. Category, this is it a JavaScript? Is it admin UI, that kind of thing? What version of Drupal? What version of the module? Say you're working on Drupal 7 versus you're more comfortable with Drupal 7 versus Drupal 8, you can narrow that down. And then of course you can narrow it down by the component to say you're more comfortable working with the JavaScript or the admin UI than other things. You can really refine these searches down. And then along with that search, we have an advanced search feature, which is not enabled by default, but it's just a simple selecting a link that opens up more fields. But you can search by who the issue is assigned to, who submitted the issue, who's following the issue, and then by certain issue tags. And again, we'll go over this. Some of these use cases is, say you're working with someone in your agency and you can't remember the title of the issue, but that that they're following it. You can type their name in the followed field, and all of the issues that they are following will pop up in a view. So there's the different statuses of the module, but the ones that we're going to be looking at today, mostly we're going to be looking at needs review first, because that's how we're going to kind of sift our search a little bit and determine what to work on. So we're going to look at needs review. And the next two I've highlighted on the screen are needs work and reviewed and tested by the community, because after we find those issues that need review and we review them, most likely we're going to be changing the status back to needs work, like the patch wasn't specific enough, or it didn't follow coding standards or what have you, or reviewed and tested by the community, which means that you've reviewed the patch, it applies cleanly, you've reviewed the code, and you think that it's ready for being committed. So those are the three we're going to look at specifically today. Okay, here's this brief look at the tools. Again, you don't have to have all of these installed on your machine, but these are definitely helpful. Drush is Drupal shell, it sort of extends your terminal a little bit more. There's specific instructions for installing Drush on different platforms, and these links are in a document for helpful links that will be shared along with this recording. Git is a version control system, and Git is generally what we use in Drupal. I know in WordPress they use Git and SVN, so depending on the open source project that you work on, make sure that you use the same version control system, because it helps with the workflow. If your patches and your workflow are the same as everyone else's. And then Composer, it's a dependency management for PHP. So it's a managing system that helps with packages, some contributed modules and core. There's the core code, but there's different packages and libraries that come along with it. And Composer, what that does is it helps you upon downloading this or setting up your machine locally, it helps you manage all of those dependencies and download them for you. Having a text editor, or IDE, is super great. There's lots to choose from. I use a couple of different IDEs or text editors. I use a really plain text editor when I'm doing simple files like READMEs or, YAML files and stuff like that. So I use BB Edit, and then I use a more, not quite an IDE, but I'll use Sublime. But the thing with IDEs is, as a beginner, there might be a learning curve for you. So unless you're doing like some code debugging or something like that, um, tools like Sublime or TextMate or Atom will definitely work for reviewing patches. Tugboat.qa, they offer an automated on-demand deployment, basically previews to accelerate development in the issue queue. And this is only in core right now, but it deploys environments to help bridge the technical divide and bring the ability to review changes to more users. And simply put, it's browser-based. It spins up an environment for you. It attaches the patch and attaches any merge requests on there. Tugboat reduces friction by making the changes visible to you especially if you're testing some user interface type stuff. And it's definitely more accessible than having a local environment on your machine, because you simply click a button and you can preview a URL. Simply Test Me. Simply Test Me is built on Tugboat. So it works much in the same way, where it's browser-based. It's, again, an online service that provides on-demand sandbox environments for evaluating projects on Drupal.org. You can evaluate modules, you can evaluate themes, you can evaluate distributions. You can test most modules within a remote version of Drupal using this tool, so it's super handy. You can test patches using the advanced options functionality. In this screenshot, you can see that there's a couple of fields that you can choose from. And we'll look at Simply Test Me a little bit more, because that's the tool we're going to be using for reviewing a patch online. Something to note, the login details for Simply Test Me are admin, so username and password are admin. Just some good information to know. And this tool does not always work. So when you apply a patch using Simply Test Me, it might throw that the patch failed. But when that happens, I do recommend that we do it locally. So we'll do it both ways when we go over the demo. Dredditor, this is a browser extension only for Chrome right now, and sometimes Firefox. I don't use Firefox a lot, so I'm not sure if it's available in Firefox. It's an extension for Drupal.org that enhances the user experience in the issue queue. It's Dredditor, so it's short for Drupal editor. And again, this has some useful tools that it does, but because it's not actively maintained, I think on their website it says that their status is cloudy with a chance of deprecation. But these tools are great while we have them. It's just, these last two tools, Simply Test Me and Dredditor, are community worked on tools. And so, have patience with them, know that they don't always work. They don't always have full functionality, but have the backup of you doing it on your machine as well. So reviewing the patch. So maybe some of you are wondering why we're talking about patches, because we have this new workflow for merge requests. So I'm just going to read this slide for ADA, but while project maintainers may not require patches and can handle merging and testing themselves with Git remotes, non-maintainers trying to test an issue will be greatly helped by a patch file. Patch files allow for faster delivery of changes across multiple test environments. So we are embracing the merge request, but the patches aren't going away anytime soon. So it's still relevant to learn how to apply a patch and how to make a patch in the issue queue. So the review process is pretty straightforward. I'm not going to say easy, but I'm going to say straightforward because there's only a few steps. So after finding the issue that we work on, what we want to do is we want to find the code repository and download it onto our machine. We want to download the patch. That's directly from the issue queue. We want to apply the patch. We can either use Simply Test Me or we can use it locally in our Git repository. Now, you don't always have to download the repository on your machine. If it's a simple patch that you can't see in the UI, you could use Simply Test Me to do that. So we're going to look at it both ways. So after you apply the patch, you want to review any user interface changes. You want to look at the code. You want to make sure that the patch addresses any of the issues that were tagged in the issue summary. And then you want to provide useful feedback after you test and review the patch. And then you update the status to either like needs work, needs review, or reviewed and tested by the community. So again, pretty straightforward. Download the repository, download the patch, apply the patch, review the code and UI, and provide useful feedback. So Dredditor, I love this tool for new beginners. It inserts some useful buttons into the issue queue for you. So this is a picture of what my issue queue looks like with the Dredditor extension. So if you don't have the Dredditor extension, it's going to look a little different from this. But what's nice about this is this review button. This review button opens up a display like a diff file and kind of highlights the code that's changed. Without it, it's just a white screen with a bunch of pluses and minuses, whereas this button really highlights the changes and makes them real apparent. And then there's the Simply Test Me button, which you simply press this button. It spawns a Drupal website that attaches the patch to the correct version of what's being tested, and you can test your patch that way. And there's some bonus features with Dredditor. You know, again, there's that, you can see on the side of this screenshot, it provides the color-coded diff file. But also, if you have code comments to make, you simply click on the line of code and a dialog box opens on the side where you can insert code comments, you can insert specifics about the code, and it pastes it automatically back into the issue queue as the next comment. This might not make sense now, but when we look at it, you kind of see like, whoa, it's a really handy tool. So I don't think this slide loaded, but basically what I have on this slide is, you know, to iterate the steps, you know, download the patch, download the repository, apply the patch, and the patch command is get apply -v, and I can show you where to find that on Drupal.org. Okay, so now we're going to take a tour of the issue queue. So I'm going to open my browser up a little bit. And again, we talked about finding an issue being the most complicated part. I do want to show you folks the Drupal.org profile page. And kind of what I want to do is show you this dashboard. You know, there's these buttons I told you across the side, but this dashboard is really powerful. So if I select that link and go to my dashboard, everyone's dashboard is different because it's configurable. You can add blocks with this link on the top. So the links that I have a contributor links block. So this gives me some really handy documentation on different things. It also sort of breaks down the issue queue into predefined searches. One of them being novice, which is super nice. So you can select this button and the issue queue will only open up with novice issues. I have a block specifically just for Drupal core. You know, you can see that there's 23,000 plus issues open. I have my issues. Yesterday I was working on something and today I want to quickly find it. I can find this list and there's the issues that I have opened myself. There's a block also where it lists all of the things I have posted to, and this is different than your issues because my issues are issues that I created myself, where posts are any comments that I made across the Drupal.org issue queue. So if I made a comment on a patch yesterday, I can find it in this block. And then there's some other things, you know, like, you know, say you do updates for your agency, you know, there's a block for advisories for security. There's Drupal news. There's, you know, a block for the Drupal Planet syndication if you want to read articles. So that dashboard is super handy. So I'm just gonna, you know, click on novice issues so we can see, and we're going to look at this advanced search function. So here we are searching for an issue. You know, we're going to look for a novice issue because we're new to the issue queue and we've never done this before. And sometimes it's just easier to start on a novice issue. And feel free to work on a novice issue, even though you're not a novice coder. It's okay to work on a novice issue to acquaint yourself with the queue. But what I do is I just make it apparent that, you know, I tell folks taking the workshops, if you work on a novice issue, but say you've been a coder for 12 years, just say, you know, I'm new to the issue queue. This is my first time uploading a patch. This is my first time making a review. And that way people will know why you picked a novice issue, because we do like to recommend that if you do have a little bit more honed skills, to leave the novice issues to people who need more of the practice and muscle memory. It's just good etiquette. So you can search by project, you know, you can start typing in and everything sort of auto completes. So if you want to work on, you know, something like meta tag or metadata, you know, will populate for you. You know, say I want to work on something with Jim Birch, I can, you know, find issues that are assigned to him. But what I want to do is we want to find novice, but we also, since we're working on review issues, we're going to refine the search to needs review. So when we hit search, we're going to find issues that are tagged novice, and we're going to find issues that are the status is needs review. So I'll hit search. And in this list, you can see it's color coded. Like I said, all of the issues here are needs review. So all of them are highlighted yellow. You can see that there's Drupal core issues. There's issues for contributed modules. And we're going to look at these replies. You know, I said to kind of stay away from issues that have a lot of comments, you know, like this one here, Drupal core, there's 90 comments. So this might not be a good issue to work on as a novice. This issue was also created 4 months ago or 4 years ago. It's currently being worked on, but this issue has been being worked on for almost 5 years. So as a novice, maybe a good idea to stay away from this one, because you won't have that that immediacy of, you know, having having it be reviewed and committed right away. You know, so those are some of the things I look at. You know, here's the version of Drupal. You know, say you're more comfortable with Drupal 7, you can refine your search to just Drupal 7 kind of things. And for the sake of brevity, I've already found an issue for us to work on. So in that case, what I would do is I would select the title of the issue and the issue would pop up. So the issue that I've pre-selected, and I've been working on this for a few contrib days, you know, showing new contributors how to do this. It's a README. So a README is in the code, but it isn't code. It's more documentation. You know, it's written in markup or plain text. You know, so this is a good issue for a non-coder as well as a novice. So I opened this issue a while back in a workshop, and the README has a typo. So let's look at the work through this issue and see if this is something we want to work on. While reviewing the module, I noticed the README has a typo, and I indicated that, you know, requirees should be requires. Okay, so that's a simple fix. So the resolution I proposed was to upload a patch, review the patch. And because I was working on this on a contribution workshop, I did denote that that's what I was doing, because that's just super handy for folks to know that that you're reserving the issue for someone else. And this is such a low priority issue that that's okay to do. Okay, so we know that it needs review. So if we scroll down, we can see that I've attached a patch. So I've attached actually 2 patches. So we're going to look at the most current patch. And here's these buttons that Dreditor injected for us. So we're going to hit this review button, and we can see that the only changes I made were to one file, a README, the readme.txt file, and then we can see the changes that I made. You can see that the typo was fixed from line to line. Pretty handy, really easy to see. But I do want to show you the comparison is if you didn't have that, if you right click and if I open in a new tab, this is what the patch looks like without that editor button, without that extension. Say there was more lines of code to look at. You can imagine how complicated this can get with just a white screen, with just a couple of pluses and minuses. It's really hard, especially imagine, you know, if the patch spanned across multiple files. This would be a little bit more complicated to read. So that's why I like that editor extension. So we hit review. And it looks good to me, but say there was something wrong, you know, say, sure, the patch fixed the one mistake, but the punctuation is wrong. And this is just a model, so that's not really the case. But if you select the line of code, that dialog box opens up and you could say, code needs work, and then you would write the specifics, pretty simple. You would hit save, paste, and then that code, that piece of code was injected into the comment as well as your code comment. So if you're working on multiple lines of code and there's several things wrong, you can paste each of those segments and it makes code commenting pretty straightforward and easy. But that wasn't the case, so we're going to delete that. So that's the Dreditor review button. Here's the Dreditor simply test me button. This lowers the barrier to Drupal contributions because I don't have to install a local instance of Drupal on my machine. I can press this button. The Simply Test Me user browser interface opens up. And like I said at the beginning of the workshop, we are currently working on this tool. So there are these bugs right now, like these errors, which they're up there for now. We're going to take them off, but it is a work in progress. But this shouldn't affect the thing. So what happened is it populated with the information from the metadata. You know, we're working on 8.1, and here's the name of the module. You know, the module was injected at 8.1, and it also injected the URL to that patch, which is super handy. So say you needed to upload multiple patches, you would just click this add patch, you would paste in the patch URL, and then you just hit launch sandbox. And fingers crossed, the sandbox will spin up a site. And like I said, Simply Test Me does not always work. I did test this last night. So we're just going to wait for a couple of seconds here and make sure that it spawns a little bit. And then we're going to look at the alternate way to look at reviewing a patch. So we're going to, you can see that it's working its way through. The environment is being prepared. It's downloading dependencies. It's doing all that work that we would have had to done on our local machines, but it would have taken more time. And sometimes taking the time to review a patch as straightforward as this one doesn't warrant the time it takes to set up a new environment on your machine. So while this is working, I want to show the alternate way to review a patch, and we'll come back to this. So if we go back to the issue, you know, we talked about Simply Test Me being the way to apply a patch, but there's also where you apply the patch locally. And remember the steps from the workshop. If we go back, we download the repository, we download the patch, and then we apply it. So to download the repository, you want to work outside of the issue queue, and we're going to find the project page where all the information about this project is based. You know, this is where you find the issue queue for this specific project. But down here on the side, there's a View Code Repository button where you can view the code repository in GitLab. If you don't want to, if you're just you want to find the repository and look and see about some changes and stuff like that. But up here on the top, there's a version control tab. And if you select the version control tab, it tells you some basic things about working in the issue queue. It tells you how to set up the repository. It tells you how to create a patch, how to apply a patch. So this is a good page for reference. And this is on every single project page, has this version control tab. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up the repository for the first time. So I just snag this command, copy and paste. I open my terminal. which you folks will not see. So I'm going to stop sharing and share my desktop instead. Okay, so now you should see my desktop. And if I open my terminal, I'm going to clear this out. I'm going to make it a little bigger for folks. Okay, so if I do a PWD, which is a present working directory, you can see I'm in my home folder. And what I want to do for ease is I'm just going to download this repository in my desktop. So I'm going to CD change directories into my desktop. And I copy that command, which is basically cloning that 8.1 branch onto my machine. So I'm downloading that onto my machine on my desktop. And remember, the second part of that was to download the patch. So if we go back to the issue queue and we right click the patch, the third patch, I'm going to save the link. I'm also going to save it onto my desktop for ease so we can find it. So we've downloaded the patch. So the second step is apply the patch. Okay, so if we go back to that version control page, applying patches, there's some different things. Applying a patch right here, we're going to do get apply -v and the patch. So we go to my terminal. We're going to do a PWD to make sure we're in the right place, present working directory. We see that we're in the CK editor font. So again, the command was get apply -v. So get apply -v. And then a little trick is you can just drag this into your terminal. Okay, so what this tells us is it's checking the patch. It applied the patch cleanly. So yay, we know the patch applied. So that's one step of the review process, is just making sure that the patch applies. And what we want to do is we want to open this up and we want to redo a little bit of a code review. So I'm going to open my text editor, which I'm going to use Sublime. And I did a command over here, open space period. And what this did was it opened it in my Finder, which was super convenient. So what I'm going to do is clean this up a little bit. I'm going to just drag this folder into my text editor, and there it is. So that's a super handy trick. And we're going to look at the README. So remember, what we're looking for is that requires is spelled right. So what was the parameter? So we're going to do a quick search for the misspelled word, and we're going to spell it wrong. Oh, oops. And we don't find it on the page. So I can see right here that the edit has been made. Okay, so we applied the patch. We know that it applied. We're looking at the code, and we can see that the code is clean and it was a fix, and it was fixed. So we're ready to make a comment on this. Okay, so we're going to close that out. We're going to go back to that simply test me and kind of look and see what simply test did for our patch. So if we go here, look at that. Okay, so this was the simply test site that was spawning up. We know that the patch applied because it opened a Drupal instance for us. If the patch hadn't have applied, it wouldn't have opened this for us. Say this was a patch that addressed a UI issue, user interface, you could log into the site, using those credentials, admin, open the site, direct yourself to where the UI problem was and take a screenshot. But this wasn't a README. And for those that might not be aware, a README does not show up anywhere in the UI. And that's why we looked at the code in the code repository. So yay, our patch applied there too. So that was a perfect instance. So we're going to go back here. And normally I would say, because I wrote the patch, I would not be the one to make a comment on it. But since we're using this in a workshop, I'm going to take the liberty to do that. And I've talked to the maintainer about this process. But normally, you don't review your own code. You don't review your own patches. But what we're going to do is we're going to make a comment. First, I'm going to be transparent that I'm working on this in a workshop. I worked on this review in a contribution workshop. We applied the patch locally with no issues. We applied the patch using simply test with no issues. We reviewed the code and the misspelling is addressed. Marking RTBC. So we're going to change the status from needs review to RTBC, which is reviewed and tested by the community. And I'm also going to say I do understand it is not protocol to review one's own patches, but we did this in a demo. I just like to be transparent. I understand it is not protocol to review one's own patches, but we did this in a demo. Okay, so that looks good. I'm going to check the metadata a couple of times and make sure everything's right. I did not assign it to myself. I'm going to come down here. I'm going to make sure, because I'm actually getting paid for my time. We have a little bit of metadata for Drupal.org that we keep track of from year to year, whether or not people are volunteering their own time or if agencies are paying them. So, it's best practices, say you're working for Pantheon, to make sure that you have Pantheon designated as your organization. And say you're working on a client project and they have a Drupal.org page, you could also apply the credit to them as well. So everything looks good. So I'm just going to hit save. And now we can see, if we go to the top, this is green. So when it shows up in the issue queue, now it's going to show up as green, and it changed the status from reviewed, from needs review to reviewed and tested by the community. Generally, you can tell your comment applies if you have a message across the top, that this issue has been updated. Oh, you know what we could also do is we could update the summary because we have reviewed the patch. So that's something that, is pretty straightforward. We'll just go in here and strike it. And then we'll make a comment that we updated the summary. So updating the summary is important on all life cycles of the issue, because there could be a long to-do list, not just review the patch and upload a patch. Say there's multiple tasks to do. The next person who works on the issue, it's super nice for them to be able to just look at the summary real quick and have a visual indication of where the to-do list is. And again, just hit save. And now what happens is anyone who's commented on this issue, I think his name is Eric, will get an email that someone commented on the issue. The maintainers, depending on how they have their notifications set up, they could just get emails when things are marked RTBC, so they could get an email. Here's that follow button I told you about. Once you comment on an issue, you automatically follow the issue. So if someone comments next, you'll get an email. On some of the more complicated issues, I've actually unfollowed issues, and that way I don't get emails every time someone comments, so that's some functionality that Drupal.org provides for you. I do want to go over again just kind of the straightforward process. We navigated to the project page. We selected the version control tab. From the version control tab, we set up the repository for the first time using the terminal, using just copy and pasting these commands. Going back, that's the downloading the repository part. We went to the issue, we right-clicked on the issue, and we saved the link as, and we saved that locally on our machines. And then we applied the patch. We went into our Get repository and we used the command get apply -v and the path to the patch. We also used simply test me, where we didn't have to do any of those steps. We just used the issue queue, and we spawned the site using the button. Pretty straightforward. And then we reviewed the UI. Well, we didn't, because there wasn't a UI change, but we looked at the code. We looked at the patch file, and we provided useful feedback, and we changed the status of the issue. So that's the straightforward version of how the review process works. I do invite folks, say maybe, you want to get your hands wet, to learn how to apply a patch, but you don't necessarily know how to review the code. Go into the issue queue, download the repository, apply a patch, maybe make a practice comment, not in core, but in the contributed space, make a comment that says, hey, this is my first time doing this. I don't know how to review the code, but I wanted to apply a patch. So I applied the patch, it applied cleanly. For something like that, I wouldn't change the status to reviewed and tested by the community, but just ask for more collaboration on it, and people are really sensitive and kind in the issue queue when you're transparent that you're a novice and you're new. And it's okay to kind of get your hands wet in the little ways that you can, or say, this applies more to creating the fix, but say you only know how to fix half of it, supplying that half of the code that you do know is helpful for the next person, because they don't have to be redundant, so it's okay to make those little steps when you're a beginner. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I am the most beginner of beginners when it comes to contributing, and my main takeaways here are more clear communication is better. Mm-hmm. Both in coming from what I've done or what I plan to do with reviewing the patch, or can't because I don't know how to move beyond the next step, but also about my status as a novice.
Mm-hmm. No, and that's taken me a couple of years to realize that that's an important part of the new contributor process, I think, because in a previous workshop we gave earlier in the week, I talked about being grateful and not taking things personally, because a lot of these people are giving their time for free when they're maintaining modules. It takes, mm-hmm. It's outside of their work hours. And so they aren't always the most patient people. But, well, that's sort of an overgeneralization, but sometimes they can appear short, so as a beginner, we don't always recognize that, but they've given, an extra 3 hours on their workday to give back to a project, and they're having someone be like, I have this bug, I have this bug, I have this bug. So you have to give them a little bit of grace, and then I found when we comment that we're beginners, they give us a little bit more grace as well, so it's sort of that two-way street.
And everybody could use a little bit extra patience and grace right now.
Right. And then we have a couple minutes left. I want to just mention the new merge request workflow. That merge request workflow is pretty straightforward as well. If you've done any work like in GitHub or GitLab and, agency work, and you work with, Git repositories, it's much the same, it aligns with creating branches and reviewing branches and that sort of thing. And then in core, we have Tugboat, where where you can push a button and look at the merge request and it spins up a site for you. So it's pretty straightforward, just like Simply Test is, but we're still working on the collaboration process. You know, we're unclear as to like if the patch needs review and people need to collaborate on it. We're still working on that workflow. So we're not actively teaching that. That's why we're still teaching that patch workflow too for folks, because it'll be a while before we really understand. And this goes to this documentation workshop we're going to be giving later is as a beginner, the documentation on the merge request workflow isn't straightforward yet. There are some skips, some skips in the steps that as a beginner, we might not understand. So we're working on that too. And the more all of us like work on those issues and create clearer documentation around the merge request workflow, that will help with the novice people as well. Because I like to advocate, like, you don't have to be a coder to review a patch, but if you've never worked in GitHub, it's the same thing. If you've never done a merge request, you need those step-by-step instructions, you know. So so we're still like doing the patching and that kind of thing.
I was thinking that when I got around to the point of reviewing patches, taking that slide that you have that has a very clear direction to print it off, stick it right by my desk.
And the Pantheon crew is working on some documentation to kind of coincide with this workshop too, where it's actually like in a GitHub repository where it's like code commands step by step by step by step, which makes it very clear. So hopefully, like when these get up online, you know, we have that targeted documentation, because I try to make it where like I've actually tested it on my WordPress folks at work, like, okay, here's this thing, you know, do these step by step. And they were able to tell me exactly where they got caught up in the process. And that's the perfect people to tell you, you know, the people who aren't used to the workflow. So I hope that we have that documentation honed in enough where like enough non-coders have worked on it where it's very straightforward.
That's the best kind of documentation. You had mentioned a couple other workshops that we have coming up, so I just want to cover those real quick. Today is December 16th. In about 4 hours, 3 hours, we have another Drupal-focused workshop called for Drupal documentation guides. And then tomorrow, Thursday the 17th at 8:30 a.m. Pacific, we've got how to create a patch. So part 2.
Yep.
All right. Thank you so much for giving us your time today, Amy June. I will see you again very soon, and hopefully we will cover a lot more ground in a few hours.
Thank you, Katie.